her feelings are already so agitated upon the subject. The Duke went on to describe how one morning, a day or two after the Princess Charlotte's death, a paragraph had appeared in the Morning Chronicle alluding to the possibility of his marriage. He had received the newspaper at breakfast together with his letters, and, quote, "I did as is my constant practice. I threw the newspaper across the table to Madame St. Laurent and began to open and read my letters. I had not done so but a very short time when my attention was called to an extraordinary noise and a strong convulsive movement in Madame St. Laurent's throat. For a short time I entertained serious apprehensions for her safety, and when upon her recovery I inquired into the occasion of this attack, she pointed to the article in the Morning Chronicle." Unquote. The Duke then returned to the subject of the Duke of Clarence. "My brother the Duke of Clarence is the elder brother, and has certainly the right to marry if he chooses, and I would not interfere with him on any account. If he wishes to be king, to be married and have children, poor man, God help him, let him do so. For myself, I am a man of no ambition, and wish only to remain as I am. Easter, you know, falls very early this year, the 22nd of March. If the Duke of Clarence does not take any step before that time, I must find some pretext to reconcile Madame St. Laurent to my going to England for a short time. When once there, it will be easy for me to consult with my friends as to the proper steps to be taken. Should the Duke of Clarence do nothing before that time as to marrying, it will become my duty, no doubt, to take some measures upon the subject myself." Two names, the Duke said, had been mentioned in this connection, those of the Princess of Baden and the Princess of Saxe-Coburg. The latter, he thought, would perhaps be the better of the two, from the circumstance of Prince Leopold being so popular with the nation, but before any other steps were taken, he hoped and expected to see justice done to Madame St. Laurent. "She is," he explained, "of very good family, and has never been an actress, and I am the first and only person who ever lived with her. Her disinterestedness, too, has been equal to her fidelity. When she first came to me it was upon £100 a year. That sum was afterwards raised to £400 and finally to £1,000, but when my debts made it necessary for me to sacrifice a great part of my income, Madame St. Laurent insisted upon again returning to her income of £400 a year. If Madame St. Laurent is to return to live amongst her friends, it must be in such a state of independence as to command their respect. I shall not require very much, but a certain number of servants and a carriage are essentials." As to his own settlement, the Duke observed that he would expect the Duke of York's marriage to be considered the precedent. That, he said, was a marriage for the succession, and £25,000 for income was settled in addition to all his other income, purely on that account. "I shall be contented with the same arrangement, without making any demands grounded on the difference of the value of money in 1792 and at present. As for the payment of my debts," the Duke concluded, "I don't call them great. The nation, on the contrary, is greatly my debtor." Here a clock struck, and seemed to remind the Duke that he had an appointment. He rose, and Mr. Creevey left him. Who could keep such a communication secret? Certainly not Mr. Creevey. He hurried off to tell the Duke of Wellington, who was very much amused. And he wrote a long account of it to Lord Sefton, who received the letter, quote, "very apropos," unquote, while a surgeon was sounding his bladder to ascertain whether he had a stone. "I never saw a fellow more astonished than he was," wrote Lord Sefton in his reply, "at seeing me laugh as soon as the operation was over." Nothing could be more first-rate than the Royal Edward's ingenuousness. One does not know which to admire most, the delicacy of his attachment to Madame St. Laurent, the refinement of his sentiments towards the Duke of Clarence, or his own perfect disinterestedness in pecuniary matters." Unquote. As it turned out, both the brothers decided to marry. The Duke of Kent, selecting the Princess of Saxe-Coburg in preference to the Princess of Baden, was united to her on May 29, 1818. On June 11th, the Duke of Clarence followed suit with a daughter of the Duke of Saxe-Meiningen, but they were disappointed in their financial expectations. For though the Government brought forward proposals to increase their allowances, together with that of the Duke of Cumberland, the motions were defeated in the House of Commons. At this, the Duke of Wellington was not surprised. "By God," he said, "there is a great deal to be said about that. They are the damnedest millstones about the neck of any Government that can be imagined. They have insulted, personally insulted, 2/3 of the gentlemen of England, and how can it be wondered at that they take their revenge upon them in the House of Commons? It is their only opportunity, and I think, by God, they are quite right to use it." Eventually, however, Parliament increased the Duke of Kent's annuity by £6,000. The subsequent history of Madame Saint Laurent has not transpired. 4. The new Duchess of Kent, Victoria Mary Louisa, was a daughter of Francis, Duke of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld, and a sister of Prince Leopold. The family was an ancient one, being a branch of the great House of Wettin, which since the 11th century had ruled over the March of Meissen on the Elbe. In the 15th century the whole possessions of the house had been divided between the Albertine and Ernestine branches. From the former descended the Electors and Kings of Saxony; the latter, ruling over Thuringia, became further subdivided into 5 branches, of which the Duchy of Saxe-Coburg was one. This principality was very small, containing about 60,000 inhabitants, but it enjoyed independent and sovereign rights. During the disturbed years which followed the French Revolution, its affairs became terribly involved. The Duke was extravagant, and kept open house for the swarms of refugees who fled eastward over Germany as the French power advanced. Among these was the Prince of Leiningen, an elderly beau, whose domains on the Mosel had been seized by the French, but who was granted in compensation the territory of Amorbach in Lower Franconia. In 1803 he married the Princess Victoria, at that time 17 years of age. 3 years later Duke Francis died, a ruined man. The Napoleonic harrow passed over Saxe-Coburg. The duchy was seized by the French, and the ducal family were reduced to beggary, almost to starvation. At the same time the little principality of Amorbach was devastated by the French, Russian and Austrian armies, marching and counter-marching across it. For years there was hardly a cow in the country, nor enough grass to feed a flock of geese. Such was the desperate plight of the family which a generation later was to have gained a foothold in half the reigning houses of Europe. The Napoleonic harrow had indeed done its work. The seed was planted, and the crop would have surprised Napoleon. Prince Leopold, thrown upon his own resources at 15, made a career for himself and married the heiress of England. The Princess of Leiningen, struggling at Amorbach with poverty, military requisitions and a futile husband, developed an independence of character and a tenacity of purpose which were to prove useful in very different circumstances. In 1814 her husband died, leaving her with 2 children and the regency of the principality. After her brother's marriage with the Princess Charlotte, it was proposed that she should marry the Duke of Kent, but she declined on the ground that the guardianship of her children and the management of her domains made other ties undesirable. The Princess Charlotte's death, however, altered the case, and when the Duke of Kent renewed his offer, she accepted it. She was 32 years old, short, stout, with brown eyes and hair and rosy cheeks, cheerful and voluble